Clutch Chess Tournament in St. Louis. Four best chess players in the world competing against each other. Current world champion, 19-year-old Demaraja Gukesh from India, former world champion and possibly the best player of all time, Magnus Carlsen from Norway, second highest ranked player in the world, 5 times US champion Hikaru Nakamura, and third highest ranked player in the world, current US champion Fabiana Caruana. Third day belonged to Magnus Carlsen. What a magnificent performance. Let's take a look at the highlights. First, Gukesh is playing white, Magnus Carlsen is playing black. We have a position where black Magnus is a little better, but nothing special yet. Gukesh plays h4. The main idea here is for white is to attack the pawn on c4, which could be a strength or a weakness for black. And knight d2 was the best move to start attacking the pawn on c4. h4, Magnus plays h5 to block any attempts to attack on the king side of the board for Gukesh, and Gukesh decides to play rook e3 to reroute his rook on c3 to put the pressure on the pawn on c4. Magnus plays knight g4, putting some pressure on the pawn on f2. Rook c3 and queen b6. And now the pawn on f2 is gonna fall if white takes the pawn on c4. If all these exchanges happen on c4, then the pawn on f2 is under attack. So therefore, white cannot take c4 pawn at this moment, and Gukesh plays queen d2. Magnus activates his bishop, bishop h6, attacking the queen, and queen has to move away to e2, and now bishop f4, and now the knight on g3 is under attack because the pawn on f2 is pinned by the queen. Knight has to go away, and it has to go to a very ugly square h1, and now it's a sad looking knight on that square h1. Magnus continues his assault. Rook b3, g3 attacking the bishop. Bishop moves away to h6, bishop h3, and the final move of the game, queen b4. White resigned. Why did they resign? Because the rook on the c3 is under pressure, is under attack. White have to do something about it. Queen e1 doesn't help because a rook b1 pinning the queen and winning the queen. The other move is a rook takes b3. And after pawn takes b3, the only move is take the rook with a check, bishop takes c8, and black wins because it's pretty much impossible to stop the pawn from promoting, and queen b2 doesn't help because bishop d7, bishop takes a4, and then both of these pawns are just gonna go forward and promote. And the problem for white is that all their minor pieces are far away from where the action is, and Magnus Carlsen won this game. Another game I want to show you, Hikaru Nakamura, Fabiana Caruana. Two American titans. Fabiana Caruana playing black. His position is better, and you can see why, because the pawn on e2 is very dangerous and one square away from promoting. But here he makes a mistake. He plays queen d5. He wants to exchange the queens. But Nakamura doesn't have to do it. He plays c4. And after queen d3, which is another attempt to exchange the queens, again Nakamura correctly plays queen b5 check, king goes to c7, and here Nakamura had only one move to save the game, but that move is not human. Rook takes e2 was the best move in this position. Sacrificing the rook, and you're asking, what? Why? Queen takes e2, rook h8. That's another move that white had to find here. And it turns out that black cannot escape from checks. Check on queen b8 is next. So let's say rook d8 to block white's rook. But then queen a5 check. And if king goes away to, let's say, c6, then the rook on d8 falls. But if the king continues to protect the rook with the help with the other rook, then white simply continues to check, and it's a perpetual check. White survives. I hope you agree with me that this type of sequence was very difficult to find, even for a grandmaster like Hikaru Nakamura, who is second best in the world. So queen c5 check was a mistake. King b7, a5, and this is now a checkmating attack by Caruana, starting with queen b1 check, king a3, rook d3 check, king a4, queen a2 check, king b5, and rook b3. The final move of the game. White king does not have any moves, so the only move is queen b4, and then simply black is gonna play with an extra queen. So Fabiano won this game. The next game I want to show you is Magnus Carlsen is playing against world champion Gukesh. We have a pretty even position. Material is even. White threatened to take the pawn on d6. Black threatened to take the pawn on b2. We have the move f5. Attacking the rook, it's a mistake because after rook e6, now white are threatening to take both pawns on d6 and g6. Gukesh plays knight f4, attacking the rook. Rook simply takes on d6, and we have knight takes d5. And that was probably the idea here, because if rook takes d5, then rook takes c6, and we have a pretty much even endgame. But Magnus Carlsen had other plans. He plays bishop g5, rook c7, and now knight d8, another great move, not easy to find. And the knight is going to a square e6. Gukesh plays knight e7 and runs into rook e1. And now the knight on e7 is under attack by the bishop and the rook. Bishop f8 to protect that knight, and now knight e6, attacking the rook. Rook goes to c6, and here again, if rook takes c6, knight takes c6, position is even. But Magnus plays rook d7, and the knight on e7 is again under attack, has to go back to c8. We have knight takes f8, and if king takes f8, we have a checkmate in two moves. Bishop h6 check, king g8, rook e8 checkmate. So Gukesh cannot even take the knight on f8. He plays knight b6, seemingly solving his problems because the knight on f8 is still under attack, and now the rook on d7 is still under attack. But Magnus ignores the fact that his rook is under attack and plays a magnificent rook e7. And Gukesh resigns. And he resigns because if knight takes d7, knight would take on d7. White still have a material advantage because knight and bishop against the rook is still better, and also black's king is under tremendous pressure. It's basically trapped here, and white are gonna win more material. So let's say we continue with the move rook c8. We have knight f6 check, and for example, if king h8, then there is a checkmate rook h7. If king f8, we have knight h7 check, king g8. Computer shows another check here, doesn't really matter. And here a rook h7. Rook h7 is the move, and black have to sacrifice the rook on a square f6 to protect themselves from a checkmate. Another game. Magnus Carlsen is playing white against Fabiano Caruana. It's a rook endgame, very difficult to master. This is probably rook endgame is probably the most difficult part of a chess game. And here we have 3 points, pawns against 2. Magnus protects the pawn on b5 and shows a masterclass how to win a rook endgame with an extra pawn. f6, f4, very important to take the pawn with the pawn. Now the kings are going to the center of the board, which is normal for endgames. Rook goes back to b8, rook c5, king d7, and king d5. And white already have an advantage. Their king is more active. Rook f8, b6. And it's important to notice that black's king is cut off from from the b file by white's rook. Rook f5 check, king c4. Exchange of the rooks doesn't help black, I'm sorry, because they're without a pawn. Rook f1, the last attempt to start checking white's king from behind, but simply b7, and after rook c1 check, king b5, Caruana resigns. The reason he resigns is because this is a very well-known theoretical position in chess, and this is the white wins this by what's called a bridge. And bridge is coming from, let's say, rook b1, king a6, another check here, king b6, another check, and now a rook b5, and that's a bridge. And black cannot do anything. Next move is b8 queen. If rook takes b5, king takes b5, black have to play king c7 to prevent the pawn from promoting, but white is quicker getting to the pawn g6. So let's take a look. It's basically white's king is quicker. Pawn on g6 falls, then, very important, the king goes to h7, and the pass is open for white pawn to get to a queen. Obviously, this is very easy for grandmasters, but on amateur levels, you don't have to resign in the position that Fabiano resigned, because, you still can play to the end, and the opponent can always make a mistake. Finally, very interesting position between Gukesh and Nakamura. Gukesh is playing white. Nakamura has his pawn on a2, one square away from promoting to a queen, but white's threat is actually more dangerous. Rook h7 is simply a checkmate, but it's black's to move, and they obviously have only one move here to prevent the checkmate. And Nakamura finds it beautiful sacrifice of the knight. Knight e4 check. The move is the only move in this position to protect yourself from a checkmate, but still, it's a pretty impressive sacrifice of the knight. White have to take. Knight takes e4 and promotion to a queen. White still continue playing here because black's king is still kind of trapped, and white still have some threats. So they play knight g5, check by the rook, check by the queen, check by the rook, check by the queen, king goes to g6, another check. White's knight cannot take the queen because it's pinned. So we have f5, and we have here rook takes a g5, sacrificing of the rook, and after king takes g5, queen takes on e5, and black have queen against the rook, and white have nothing. There is no checkmate ideas. Still, game continues. Rook f8 check, rook f7 check, king g8, and king g6. And white now need two moves to checkmate black's king. Rook a7, rook a8. That would be a checkmate. But unfortunately for white, it's black to move, and there is a check, there is another check, and white resigns, because if they go away to, let's say, king d7, then the rook on f7 falls. So the only move here to protect the rook is king f6. But if that happens, we have queen c6 check, king e7 to still hold on to the rook, but queen c7, and on a skewer, the rook falls. Nice game by Hikaru Nakamura. He won this game. Then in the last two rounds, he made two draws with Magnus Carlsen, who already won the tournament at that stage, and the games didn't really matter. And let's take a look at the final standings, and honestly, it's not even fair. Magnus finished with 25.5 points. It was 3 points for each win in the last day of the tournament, and $170,000. And everyone else is way behind. Caruana and Nakamura finished on the podium. The world champion Gukesh disappointed in the last 2 days after a brilliant first day. Like, subscribe, and thank you for watching.